Hey there, welcome to the Energy Blueprint podcast. I'm your host, Ari Witten, and today I have with me a brain and neurodevelopmental specialist, Carol Garner Houston, who is the co-founder and chief medical officer of Brain Harmony, specializing in treating neurological disorders without pharmaceuticals. In their groundbreaking telemedicine program, Brain Harmony applies the principles of neuroplasticity of the brain to treat disorders such as PTSD, anxiety, depression, sensory and auditory processing, sleep, stress and sleep, speech and communication, behavior, autism spectrum, attention and regulation, learning and dyslexia, traumatic brain injury, and post-concussive syndrome, stroke and Parkinson's, and I assume more. That's quite a list of, I think you pretty much covered every possible brain-related issue there, Carol. Carol is an occupational therapist with 23 years of experience and the recipient of Health System Innovation Award from the National Association of Public Hospitals and Health Systems serving vulnerable populations. Her outcomes are the best in the world, with clients gaining years' worth of skills in several months' time frame and returning optimal brain performance to injured and diseased systems. So welcome to the show, Carol. Such a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, so I want to say that, I've read quite a bit on Stephen Porges's work around polyvagal theory, and I've delved quite deeply into that. And then one of the things he advocates is a system called ILS, which is, I believe it stands for Integrated Listening Systems, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And I found you through that. You were recommended through a mutual friend named Randall, who was raving about your work. And so I looked into it. I listened to some podcasts with you, and I said, I need to have you on the show. So I'm glad we're finally making it happen, and welcome.
Oh, me too. This is going to be fun.
Yeah. So I just read your bio there. We talked that. I think that gives a nice overview of what you do. Specifically for people listening to this show who are interested in improving their energy levels, improving their brain function, and the brain has key roles as far as energy and mood. But also there's a lot of people, one of the things that overlaps with chronic fatigue for many people is brain-related symptoms like anxiety and depression and brain fog in particular.
Yes.
So can you speak to kind of on a high level as far as what you're doing in relationship to some of those symptoms?
Absolutely. One of the first things when we attempt to reorganize the neurological system is we first have to go in and calm and soothe and provide comfort. That you started with mentioning Dr. Porges and the Safe and Sound protocol. That's exactly how we would start with any of our friends or clients that have those types of symptoms. We would go in to soothe the parasympathetic nervous system, and we use sound frequencies to do that. Porges has created such beautiful work in regards to using sound frequencies to reach specifically the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is connected to all of the autonomic nervous system, the things in our body that happen automatically, like your breath rate and your heart rate. What's super wonderful about the vagus as well is it will connect to the bowel and bladder connections of the human system, as well as the social portal. And so we first go there, we provide comfort there first. And that's our favorite tool to do that with. Specifically, how he does that is he's recorded music with human voices in it. And the prosodic features are, when you put the headset on, the prosodic features of those voices will pass through the tympanic membrane in the inner ear to reach the vagus nerve. And you can begin within 5 days of this protocol, you can begin to feel that settling, that reset to the autonomic nervous system, which is such a gift for any of our friends that you were speaking of. There's lots of trauma involved with those. There's lots of medical trauma, and this is the first place that we go. We also use a small little tool that I'm wearing now. It's the Alpha Stim. That's also a nice tool that we use. It produces the alpha waves in the brain, which combat anxiety, insomnia, and depression. So we can give, in this case, when I use this tool, within 20 minutes. And then with the other tool, you can start to receive very calming input within 5 days. After that, we will use very specific frequencies with the use of the focus protocol that has frequencies that are set to impact very specific parts of the brain. So our friends who are looking for more energy, that cognitive fog, those things that you mentioned, we are going to first connect the brain body with some lower frequencies, but we are essentially going to the higher frequencies, which elevates mood, creativity, enthusiasm, the higher cognitive functions such as executive functioning, and speed of processing. So what's fantastic is we love using these tools. Several of the clients that we have used it with were so severely depressed, and with that comes that severe lack of energy, and they just couldn't get out of bed. So we comfort their system. We start rolling in a couple of our protocols. It softens the edges. But then once we get to these higher frequencies, on our weekly telemedicine phone calls, I'll pick up the phone, and one day I picked it up, and this lovely woman who's been suffering for her since her adolescent years I said, "How are you?" She says, "I got out of bed today." And it was so significant, and it's so exciting that you can use sound frequencies to impact your energy level and your mood.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's step back a little bit, because there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. For everyone listening who has no idea who Stephen Porges is, who knows nothing about the vagus nerve, who knows nothing about polyvagal theory, let's explain some of those concepts, because I feel like everything that we're going to talk about in this podcast is going to connect into those. So let's go there first to make sure we've laid the groundwork for everybody to understand what's to come.
Okay, absolutely. So anytime you say the polyvagal theory, that is the vagus nerve that they're referencing, and the poly part is how many pieces it's connected into the human system, and how important it is to have a very well-regulated autonomic nervous system, which is required for function. So we use the vagus nerve as a 10th cranial nerve, and it connects, like I mentioned, to the major organs of the human body. And it develops, he's such a fascinating read. He has several books that is just very exciting, and you could really read, and we could talk about it in depth for hours, because he essentially begins talking about how the lower evolution and the lower frequencies as it went through evolution allows for certain sound frequencies, specifically the lower frequencies, the predatory sounds, very reptilian, very part of the primitive brain, for them to be able to perceive the vibration of a predator and the sounds of a predator.
Real quick, for people who maybe don't understand low frequencies and high frequencies, can you give an example? And I know I don't know how awkward I need to make this as far as you making animal sounds or something like that, but I just want to make sure people understand the difference between low and high frequencies.
Okay, yes. So the lower frequencies are definitely the lower voices. It is just in the predatory type of sounds.
It's like deeper bass tones.
Deeper bass and cello sounds. There,
okay.
It is the human system is built to perceive those sounds and have a response to it. It's part of our makeup of who we are. So, for example, those lower frequencies, we consider those between 0 and 750 hertz. And so for that, in that space, for so many, we're trying to give you an explanation of the connection between the primitive brain with that reptilian type of response, right? So those reptiles are close to the ground. They have lower, and they can read lower frequencies. They perceive the vibration as well as the sounds, and they have been set to know to run, fight, or flee from those sounds. That is an interesting point because so many who are sensitive to sounds or just have that high level of anxiety frequently is because their ear, for whatever reason, we can talk about the causal relationship, but their ears are only perceiving the low frequencies. So as that's going in their ear, it's just setting to their autonomic nervous system a fight or flight response. That's why that's the first thing we go to, is to calm that fight or flight response. And Porges has taught us how to do that with sound frequencies, to reach into the tympanic membrane, reach that vagus nerve, reset it, and then use the prosodic features, which are the human voices, the human aspects that can soothe an individual. Those are then sent into the music, and it calms the nervous system that way. So hopefully, as I begin to talk about this, it's complex science in there, but we want to break it down so it's very easy to understand and swallow.
Yeah. Now, let's delve a little deeper into the polyvagal theory. So different parts of the vagus nerve.
Yes.
What are these different parts, and what do they do or control, or how do they relate to our experience in life?
Yes, so that is the autonomic nervous system, breath rate, heart rate. It's also connected to bowel and bladder, as well as the social portal of the human system. We are all intended to be social creatures to survive. We're required to breastfeed. We need a family to build shelter and collect food. It takes a very long time for a human to become independent. So that social piece is very important, and it's very much so anatomically connected to the vestibular apparatus inside the inner ear, as well as the major organs I mentioned before, as well as to all the muscles of the face and the oral motor muscles as well. So what that means is that when you can use a tool like this, you can actually activate the social portal of the human system, and it will stimulate. During the protocol, you can see some of their cheeks maybe getting pink because it's that vagus nerve is being awakened and reset. It also can help stimulate the ocular motor muscles, as well as those ocular motor muscles are then used for eye contact, but not just superficial eye contact just by looking at someone. I'm talking about that deep connection that you can have and communication with someone non-verbally just through the use of your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
That is that human connection that so many people are looking for, whether it's been blunted by trauma or maybe it just never really was activated for the growing individual. We can activate it with the use of the polyvagal theory and its expression through the Safe and Sound protocol. It's really quite fascinating and can be just what an individual needs to begin to pull themselves off of the couch or pull themselves out of a very a state that they need out of. It activates that. It embraces the textures of the human experience. And it's fabulous because your background's in psychology, right? And we talk about mood and emotions and things of that nature. And when we talk about the social portal of the human system, it's not just a concept, it's an anatomical feature, and we can follow it with anatomy into all of these features. And then the best way that I know how to express it is how the SSP affects so many of our clients that are using it.
What's SSP?
That's short for Safe and Sound.
Safe
Yes,
and Sound
that's
protocol.
not the Safe and Sound protocol.
Okay.
So usually clients are reaching out to us for either themselves or a family member. And then when that unit and our protocols are sent to their home, we help them open the box and we teach them how to use them. As they go through this 5 days of this new listening program, it reawakens all kinds of activity for the brain while calming the sensory system so that fight or flight, that defensive type of reaction, is soothed. And I have heard several of our adult clients talking about didn't realize that the Safe and Sound protocol was going to be marriage counseling, because as it activates that social portal and the human is allowed to process human speech better, the communication is deeper. The nonverbal giving and reading of cues is deeper. We frequently hear that people are expressing affection and emotion much more easily, and as well as verbalizing them. Adults and children, for that matter, they are giving us all kinds of wonderful feedback of this tool really pushing them into that connectedness that is uniquely human.
Mm-hmm. Now, within polyvagal theory, there's sort of these three branches, the ventral vagal, dorsal vagal, and sympathetic branch.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit about what a person's experience might be, or what their dominant emotional states and sort of ways of being, or facial expressions and ways of interacting with others might be, depending on which of those three branches is optimal? Or, sorry, which of those three branches is dominant, I should say?
Well, a good example would be the when you're not feeling that connectedness at all with others, and that is a real problem. You can have that blunted affect of your face, right, where you're talking with someone and it's just a little bit flat all through the conversation. You can see that in all kinds of different diagnoses after stroke, traumatic brain injury, things of that sort. You can have the superficial branch, and as it does the muscles of the face and the eyes, you have different branches again that can do that, that have that fight or flight response in there. And I say that over and over because there's that defensive response, that rigidity in thinking, that no to new ideas, that no to wanting to move, that no to wanting to evolve, is part of your autonomic nervous system, and the vagus nerve is the king of how to reach that and reset it. There is also too a part of the nerve that will, and which is also part of the fight or flight, which is the bowel and bladder control. So if we have adults who have sustained an injury to the brain, or we have a child who just doesn't have that brain-body connection to have the bowel and bladder be potty trained, we can build it by exposing them to the Safe and Sound protocol. It reawakens that brain-body connection, specifically with the bowel and bladder, because that's part of the fight or flight response. The individual will need to, if you think back when we were in the times where we had to hunt our food, if a tiger is coming or you're hearing those predatory sounds and you know what's coming, the human body is set up to eliminate, so then you can move and run faster. Right? And so there's certain parts that are going to work too, and the blood vessel will go more towards the core of the body in case you lose a finger or an arm. All the blood, they're trying to pull it into the core of the body. So all of these pieces are working together. And it's just fabulous how it goes throughout the entire human system and how it reaches from all the different branches into that social portal. Because when you think of fight or flight, you think, wow, how is that connected to how I, socially communicate? But it's all very connected with the polyvagal aspect of the vagus nerve.
Right. So that was actually my next question, ties into what you just said there, which is, the old sort of conception of the autonomic nervous system was either you're stressed or relaxed. So either sympathetic or parasympathetic. And the polyvagal theory is quite a bit more complex than that. But one of the interesting layers to the story that is much more emphasized within polyvagal theory is this social portal, this interpersonal relationships, and you talked a bit about, for example, facial muscles and how
Mhm.
that relates to expression of emotions and communication. Um, how does sound tie into specifically the social portal and interpersonal connection?
Yes. Okay. So he uses, just as the brain needs oxygen and ketones and glucose for metabolic function, it also requires stimulation in the form of sensory input for optimal performance. So we use the vestibular system and the cochlea inside the inner ear. They're actually part of one system, and it converts sound, movement, and vibration into electrical signals. And thus, sound, through its effect of the inner ear, is a nutrient to the entire brain and the neurological system. So, this safe and sound protocol uses. He just so beautifully matches the anatomy and evolution and rolls it into the production with a listening program. So all the individual needs to do is put the headset on and press play for that day. And what's recorded into that are the prosodic features that are set to impact the neurological system. It speaks to it through sound. It exercises the muscles, the teeny tiny muscles of the inner ear, in such a way that it can activate parts of the brain. It's a stimulation for that social portal. All the muscles of the face, get your heart rate, at a better even keel. And when you feel comforted and you are safe, neurologically safe, then you start to see those little sparkles of social initiation, or a deeper level that wasn't there, that was potentially blunted or disrupted.
Hmm. Now, how does this tie into energy, cognitive function, emotional resilience, like all of those symptoms that I mentioned, also that sometimes tie in with people with that overlap with chronic fatigue? Where does the safe and sound protocol and these different frequencies of sound tie into those things?
Well, when you're in one of those diagnoses, you know how it feels, you know how immobilizing it can be, and without that feeling of safety, it's incredibly difficult to leave your home, to want to try and do anything new with a friend, anything to stimulate the brain to do new and exciting things, and it becomes dormant and cyclical and can be very negative in its own right. The brain gets stuck and it just goes around and around into whatever, and if you're not changing what you're doing, then it just stays in that negative cyclical route. So we use this SSP and the sound frequencies. It's like a jump start to the brain and the social portal. It reawakens the human experience. I had a client, for example, who he was unable to leave his home besides doing his work because of his sensory system was just so sensitive. He had lots of past trauma from his childhood, which left him unable to receive or perceive or give good social cues to others. So he was stuck in this rut, and he felt that no one was able to see him for who he was, or that he had something valuable to offer. And when he'd pick up his head to look at him, like going through the grocery store, all his brain saw was negative cues, and it told him to withdraw.
Mm.
After the safe and sound protocol, when he went to the grocery store, his story to me on our phone call was just glorious, as he began to say, as I walked down the aisles, and my eyes just quickly gazed through, whether it was the aisles and there were different people walking. When I caught someone's eye, he said it was as if like they recognized me, and their face just gave a very gentle smile as they walked by. But for him, that was so significant because he couldn't receive it before. It had been blunted and depressed from the past trauma and the disorganized sensory system that does plague so many of us, children through adults, especially with all of the different aspects of what can hamper that.
Mhm.
So his experience with that really got him out and further started his creativity. And he began then to, because he was able to be creative, because he was now safe and calm, he could do more things. He had his creative juices, and he got his music back loaded on iTunes. And then from there, people were contacting him and talking about deeper quality of human experiences that not only could he receive, but he could very well verbally communicate in a way that he hadn't his entire life. So something like the gift of opening the social portal of human engagement after making sure that the human feels neurologically safe, it just makes logical sense when you hear the words, but to experience it over and over with our clients is really just such an exciting gift to work with each individual, because you know what you're doing for them. You're essentially changing the trajectory of what they're doing. So then for him, he would say, okay, in the past, when I would try to exercise, I would, give myself lots of negative talk because I had to do it. I was supposed to do it. And he would get into a groove and say, all right, here I go. And he'd exercise himself until he either hurt himself, and then that was it, or got so sore that that was his justification for, okay, yeah, I can't do anymore. I don't know, it's too much. I can't do it. With the Safe and Sound, after that, he started to exercise, but he went gradually. He started slowly, and then he could feel the positive impact of that. He began to change that negative loop of what he was saying to himself, and his self-soothing skills, that inner dialogue, and he could gradually increase to where he was enjoying exercising, and then getting, of course, the chemical benefits and all of the pieces to that then further helps your energy and further helps your state of mind, further presents the sense of fog. So that is just why our job is so exciting, is taking these tools and then watching how it is expressed in each neurological system in a different way, but with these common threads.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've talked a bit about safety. You've used the words, making people feel safe a few times, and there's also the Safe and Sound protocol.
Yes.
You've already alluded to this a bit, but can you speak directly to why neurological safety, to actually have your brain in a state, this is not technically scientifically correct, but for practical purposes, to have your brain in a state of feeling safe, why is that so important, and what does it translate into?
Well, the feeling safe is absolutely the number one primary. It's just a number one human need. You have to be able to neurologically feel safe. It's not just talking to yourself that I need to be calm, I need to feel safe, or I feel safe in this state. You can still feel, unsafe if you're in your own home, if your neurological system and your past history of trauma has just set your system onto this route. The SSP is used and is being incorporated into the typical psychology and psychiatry realm, because we can get to the root and reset that autonomic nervous system, activate better communication. So those therapy and cognitive therapy sessions are much more productive after you use something like the Safe and Sound protocol, which is providing neural safety. It's not trying to convince someone to be safe, or that whoever the predator is may be locked up, but they still feel right in here all the time, that fight or flight. If you know that state, you know how uncomfortable it is. You know how it decreases your ability, it increases your anxiety and your stress. You know how difficult it is to have clear thought, because with that stress, it will shut off your creativity and that social piece that allows for that intrinsic human joyful experience. So that is really essentially how we use that SSP for trauma, and the outcomes have been significant.
Mm-hmm. In your work, you talk a lot about neuroplasticity.
Mm-hmm.
Why is the concept of neuroplasticity so important to this whole discussion? What does it actually mean, and what on a practical level, how does your therapies, how do your therapies relate to the concept of neuroplasticity?
Well, the neuroplasticity is the basis of why we get to do what we're able to do and why all these tools are as powerful as they are. Neuroplasticity means that the brain is going to change based upon the input that it's given. So we're going to give it the most organizing, the most calming, and the most therapeutic input possible. The neuroplasticity of the brain knows no age and no diagnoses. So what that means is that we can make changes in the brain, of course, as children as they're growing, but also in someone who is 98 years old, because the brain does not know how old it is. It just knows how to change. So that's what is so exciting, because the past, medical route was thought that you will develop and then essentially you hit like a plateau and then that's it. It's all just a decline from there. And we've definitely broken through that paradigm. And now it's just whoever wants to make that next leap and whoever wants to do that next piece that really needs out of a rut and needs something to push them through into the next chapter, we use these protocols to get it done.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, what other kinds of syndromes and symptoms can this be used for? I know you work a lot with kids, and for example, kids who are on the spectrum, or other kids with neurodevelopmental issues.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you find the best results? And I guess, how does the Safe and Sound protocol, how do some of these methods tie into, let's say, specifically dealing with a kid who is autistic?
So our friends on the spectrum absolutely usually have that the symptoms are lots of that fight or flight response, a very disorganized, very sensitive sensory system, maybe sensitive to sounds. They very much so will lack that speech and language communication, verbal, nonverbal, as well as that's just that whole social piece of human existence, as well as a regulatory, having very difficult time regulating themselves. So we use a tool like the Safe and Sound First, which is absolutely fantastic, because when you're trying to teach someone speech and language, if it's not developing typically, essentially I remember the words that Dr. Minson, who is the creator of the Focus program and the integrated listening system, he said that the mouth cannot produce what the ear cannot hear. So how logical it would be to first expose that individual to the Safe and Sound protocol, because it uses human voices. It will help you process human speech better. And if you can process human speech better, then you can articulate it better. It will be that connection from the brain to the oral output is there as well. And now that you know, as we talk about that social portal of human engagement, there's that spark. There's that fire of human engagement, very different from maybe some other therapies that will try to teach eye contact or social skills by using a script or using external rewards like a Skittle for every time a person gives an eye contact. Yes, you've technically checked that box, but no, in regards to as far as what a parent would like to see as their human connectedness with their child, we foster that with the use of the SSP. Again, that regulatory piece, that high anxiety, the vagus nerve, we calm it with the prosodic features in the Safe and Sound protocol, and it can help them be more regulated. When you're more regulated and you feel safe again, neurologically safe, then we can begin to rewire the brain with certain sound frequencies that are intended for very specific functions in the brain. So first, we start with a zone 1 of sensory motor. It builds a balance, a brain-body connection. It improves behavior and emotional regulation, as well as laterality, knowing on both sides of your body. So those are very basic central nervous system human skills that we need to lay first. And then from there, you can layer in the higher frequencies of cognitive function, such as attention, executive function, behavior, and regulation. It gives an accelerated maturity to the brain so that the individual can then make better choices. But first, you have to do it in this very clear bottom-up approach, because with the autism spectrum, there's development, but there's major holes in the central nervous system, and these listening programs will fill those holes from a bottom-up approach. And at the top, what comes out is more sequential development, more typical development. And as long as there's progress being made on a weekly basis, where the parents can see the progress in front of their eyes, it is very motivating. It is very much so going to positively impact their energy level, their perception, their aspect of fatigue and depression, because of those are so closely related. We're talking about our friends with autism, but it's the family that's carrying that diagnosis as well. Mm-hmm. And so usually the child in that case would be the catalyst of why we have gotten these tools in the home and we begin our process. But of course, we share them with the other family members, because why not? You have the most powerful tools in the world to make you become faster, stronger, and smarter. So why not? And then what happens is the entire family begins to all move forward, and then function begins to return. So you can take a child who's severely on the spectrum, where the family is planning for this individual to be dependent upon them the rest of their lives. That is a very difficult, and with no progress being made, very cyclical. And they just really just kind of keep growing and getting bigger. And that is a very difficult state to be in every day. But once you're able to start, you feel that progress being made, and you see it in front of your eyes, it can change everything. You take a friend who's severely on the spectrum to now they are just a little, they have like Asperger type symptoms, but they can test on standardized assessments, which means they can get a higher education, which means they can get a job that they can be more sustainable with. And that can change the trajectory of an entire family.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get really practical right now and talk, what does an actual session with you look like? What kinds of things, and I guess let's start at maybe the beginning of what a first session might look like, and what does this sort of diagnostic process look like as far as how you're getting a sense of what are the symptoms or the developmental issues that are going on there. Mm-hmm. What kind of diagnostic processes are you using? And then can you get really specific as far as what a session might look like, as far as what kinds of things you're doing in that session with the person?
Absolutely. So when a client comes to see me for the first time, we are going to do an evaluation, which usually lasts about 90 minutes. We're going to assess gross motor, fine motor, visual perceptual, reflex maturity, auditory processing as well, and as well as ocular motor control. We use as many standardized assessments as we can. So we'll use the Peabody if you're younger, developmental scales. We'll use the BOT, the Bruinsky for an older individual. And that's where we get to figure out, okay, how well can you use your bilateral coordination and your manual dexterity? How well can you use paper pencil to write? How well can you complete sentences? How good is your balance, for example? We always will be assessing the balance first, because it is a primary building block of the central nervous system from which all other skills that we were talking about are dependent. And as we mentioned, these listening programs and the treatment of it go straight to vestibular, and that's why they're so powerful, and that's why we assess it in our evaluation first. We have them do tasks with their eyes open, and then we can isolate the vestibular system by occluding their vision. And they'll do the same task, but with their eyes closed. And when they waver and they fall over with their eyes closed, it lets you know that they depend heavily on their vision to know where they are in space. And so that allows for us to see, okay, there's that hole in the vestibular system that we're going to need to fill. So we also use the berry for visual motor integration. That is copying shapes of increasing complexity. It is not letters and it is not numbers. That is done on purpose. It's just how you're perceiving those images on the page, which again is so important for academic success as well as for work and for your education. So that's another standardized assessment that can give us not only what your scores are, but it can give you an age equivalency. So you'll have a good idea, okay, if my chronological age is 9 years, 11 months, and my, writing is coming back at 5 years, 6 months, just how far behind you are. Or if you have an individual who is older, you really can understand when you have a 25-year-old or you have a 39-year-old, and we do these and give them the age equivalencies of their scores, it really helps them understand and prioritize how important this type of work is. We do our standardized assessments in that regard. We also use the SCAN-3 as far as auditory processing is concerned. Major piece to your ability to process sensory input accurately. It's a very interesting process that you feel that you're hearing and listening, but maybe you're only catching parts and bits of it, or you are catching the beginning of a word but not the end. So then you just guess what the end is, and then you're changing the entire message of what the individual is saying to you. And we can figure that in the SCAN-3. It tests how well you can process speech with background sound, like auditory figure ground, as well as with competing signals where we give 2 words at the same time, and the individual is going to try to repeat both words. From there, you can really get an understanding of how well their auditory processing maturity is evolving. A signature piece, though, of what we do and of what any good therapist is going to do if you're in rehabilitation is you're going to test for reflex maturity. And this is so important because we're all born with reflexes that help us survive outside of the womb. And so we have that startle reflex when you're an infant, and if you had them laying on the bed and you dropped something, their whole body moved as one unit, and they did the startle reflex. That's also very much so linked. If you don't, that's supposed to integrate definitely by year 1. But the trend in the community we're finding is that we still have adults with this very infantile reflex patterns, which means that startle reflex is still very much on for them all day long. Again, linking back to that neural feeling of not being safe. And so it's understandable when you start doing this work, we begin to give them very specific exercises that can break apart those infantile reflex patterns. And what you see is it positively impacts physical development as well as emotional regulation. Lots of times we do moro reflex first when clients have night terrors or nightmares or things that wake them up or sleepwalking. So it's very interesting how all of this is connected and how it is connected to your sense of safety. So reflex maturity is very important. We also look as far as attention. We will look anytime someone comes with me with attention concerns or an ADHD diagnosis, the attention deficit hyperactive disorder, the hyperactive part, how we get our hyperactive friends off the ceiling is we definitely expose them to the safe and sound protocol first. But also as well, I'm going to assess the functional movements of their eyes. It is not visual acuity near and far, and it is not the health of the eye. We're occupational therapists. We're looking at the function. So we're going to assess and see if the eyes can quickly do saccadic eye movement, which is the movement required for reading. We're also going to assess whether or not the eyes can track very smoothly like a marble in syrup in a horizontal plane. You're going to want to see that, and you're not going to want to see this jumpy motion when they're trying to track something. That's going to negatively impact your reading. That's going to negatively impact your ability to catch a ball. We're also going to look at convergence and divergence, and that's the human's ability to do near to far point copying. So if you're looking at something close to you, my eyes both need to come together as a team very smoothly, very effortlessly, so you can focus on what's close to you. And then when you pick up your head to look at something far away, you want your eyes to diverge as a team so you can gain the information, whether it's written, whether you're listening to someone on your team, or you're being given instructions from a supervisor. You need to be able to have these basic neurological skills to receive the information as expected. So ocular motor skills for attention is absolutely the number one thing. Yes, you can give someone pharma with some speed in it to speed up the brain so they can, attempt to compensate for the lack of attention. But you really have to tighten up that ocular motor, because if you can't fixate on an object for more than 10 seconds, and your eyes float away, then there goes your attention. So it's a very important building block to those higher cognitive functions, such as behavior, social skills, and attention. Mm-hmm. So let's make sure we hit all of our areas: fine motor, gross motor, visual, perceptual. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that gives a great explanation of the diagnostic aspect of things. Mm-hmm. What about on a practical level? And I know that you can't possibly relay all of the details of everything that you do as far as the therapies in a 5-minute answer, but can you just kind of give people an idea of what you might do with them if, let's say, you're working with people via telemedicine, you're doing Skype calls with them. Mm-hmm. What kinds of things would they be doing with you while on the call?
Okay, so on the calls, we are going to set our friends up and teach them how to use the listening protocols first and foremost, and how to get the most from those sessions. So again, most of the time, we're starting with our safe and sound protocol first. If you come to see me in the clinic for that first session, we're going to bring you to our safe and sound rooms, where we have built a very, very small, encapsulated, very womb-like, low lights, little Christmas lights. We have lots of very easily tolerated sensory objects that can engage an individual. It's a very quiet setting. It has very sedentary types of activities: coloring, Legos, drawing, building things, because you want the heart rate to be very low while we reset that autonomic nervous system. The safe and sound protocol is done in a quiet environment, or as quiet as you can get it in a house if you have 6 children, right? So we are also the practical application of those protocols, and will help you find that just right balance. But we're going to help you set that environment up in your own home, which is so beautiful about our telemedicine program, because you're not dependent upon getting your child or your family member or yourself to a clinic to get the neurological organization. That's just separating and making it harder accessibility to care. That's why we've created this telemedicine platform. We ship you the modalities and we coach you through it. So we teach you, hey, when you're doing the safe and sound protocol, you're going to want to be one person with that individual who's doing it, and you want to facilitate and look for eye contact and grab it with your own eyes and hold on to it. You're going to want to, whatever they're talking to you about, you're going to want to reflect the expression of what they're talking about in your face, because you're having the opportunity of re-imprinting upon them the social features of voice and how it changes, and the meaning of voice and the meaning of facial expressions. So we're going to help the individual families reproduce that in their own home. It is a fascinating process. It's a beautiful process for a family. These little spaces that are created, they're not just physical spaces. They're engagement spaces that actually can extend outside of a structure. So if you built a room for the safe and sound, it's that experience together that you then leave with, that you use in your kitchen or you're using on your way driving in the car. So we teach our parents, our caregivers, our individuals themselves to create this in their own home to get the most of their protocols. We will then schedule a video conference once the individual's in a good listening routine, and that way I have like the cliff notes of our standardized assessments from the clinic setting. We have the cliff notes of those. I've taken out the major indicators to measure the state of their neurological system, and I'll put them through a series of exercises so I can see how those pieces are functioning, and then I can customize your listening program even further to accentuate more of the skills you're looking for, as well as roll in neural exercises to further accelerate development.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating stuff. So one thing I want to come back to, we've talked about, some of the brain symptoms that overlap with chronic fatigue, anxiety, depression, brain fog. Mm-hmm. You've also mentioned ADHD. We've also covered autism. I know that there's some other applications of this, like in prenatal applications. I'm curious about newborns. I have a newborn daughter myself who's about a month old now. So
Wow,
I'd be very curious to hear your take on what might be useful for her as far as any sound suggestions. But I think for people listening who are maybe, they've heard everything you've had to say, but maybe they're still wondering, well, does this apply to me? Will this help my set of symptoms? I'd love to have you just say kind of very directly who you feel the kind of people are and the kinds of symptoms that have the most gain from this therapy with you.
Yes, the most exciting clients I like to work with, because the characteristics, I know that I can very quickly get in there and we can see great outcomes. That's attention deficit, definitely for sure, the hyperactivity and the inattention, the sensory processing, any learning delays and executive functioning. It's really just a reflection of the state of the brain. And it's all right if you didn't have it, if genetically you just weren't set up, or if you were and then you lost it through trauma, injury, or disease. We can rebuild those connections in the brain in the comfort of your own home. So I love as well working with anxiety, depression, post-traumatic. All of those are definitely areas of just it's very easy to take their intake paperwork and get them motivated, because I know what's coming for them for sure. That brain fog and speed of processing is something that we're still trying to catch on film. We see it all the time. We hear it all the time. We can measure it. And then, of course, our highest form of success is what the clients report. But trying to catch that on film can be difficult. And we've caught it on film with several children, but that can be difficult to publish, because once your child is viewed, or you have this very slow sense of processing and it's caught on film, really you only want to show the outcome, which is the awesomeness. Everybody wants to run away from the past,
right.
And I get it, so why not? But we have lots of great video of just watching how the brain just awakens from a dormant and cyclical state with rigidity in thinking, which, once I say that term, some people will think of it as stubborn, or they don't want to do anything, or that those are actually more just a state of the brain. And as you build more connections, as you awaken different parts, you get flexibility in thinking. You get that neural desire to move and want to create. That has been very exciting and can be something that you foster in all types of different diagnostic settings. And essentially, you really don't need a diagnosis to see improvement with these protocols. Essentially, what we address are the characteristics that you're looking to improve, and we will fine-tune your protocol to accentuate what you're looking for.
Beautiful. Great explanation, Carol. And I thank you so much for your time. This has been really fun and fascinating stuff. I mean, the role of sound in influencing the autonomic nervous system and how that ties into learning and attention and anxiety and depression and feeling neurologically safe, and how that ties into things like anxiety, depression, and the whole social portal and how you're interacting with other people. I think this whole sort of network of how the nervous system is affecting our experience of life and our way of relating to others. I think it's all just fascinating stuff. For people who are interested in working with you, I know you have a free consultation for people listening to this. We're going to set up a link to that for people to get this free consultation with you at theenergyblueprint.com/brain harmony. All one word, brain harmony. So I'm curious though, Carol, are you going to have enough bandwidth to be able to do free consultations with, I'm sure a lot of people are going to be reaching out to you.
Yes, and my business partner, who is also my sister and has been trained, she's been a hospital administrator for years. She is now my business partner. So when you pick up the phone, she will call, and between myself and her and several other therapists, we will get that intake paper rolling for you, let you know what we're able to do. And then we set you up, we'll ship you the equipment, and then I will help you open the box. We'll schedule a date and time. I help you open the box. I teach you how to use it, get you started on the listening program. We let the equipment do the heavy lifting. It's the easiest therapy I've ever experienced, that you just, you just don some headset and let the headset do the work. Then when you start to feel elevated and a little better, and you're starting to feel that shift, then we can layer in deeper qualities of experiences and neural exercises to further achieve the goals you're looking for.
Beautiful. Well, I certainly hope that you have the bandwidth to handle all the people going to be reaching out to you. Again, everyone listening, if you are interested in doing this, if you're interested in doing a free consultation with Carol, I highly encourage you to do that. I think, I've seen some of the results they're posting. I think it's extremely impressive, the kinds of results that they're getting with people with these brain-related symptoms. And again, I highly encourage you to reach out and do one of these consultations. You can go to theenergyblueprint.com/brain harmony, and there will be a link there to set up a free consultation with Carol. So, Carol, thank you again so much. Really, really enjoyed this. Absolutely fascinating, and have a wonderful evening.
Oh, thank you so much, and enjoy your growing family.
Thank you. Hey there, this is Ari again. One more quick thing before you go. Just make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Energy Blueprint, and also make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I will see you again next week.